Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, I want to talk about cartoons that will die with us, with our generation. And this is kind of a jokey one because the examples I'll give are probably not necessarily true. I mean, you'd be surprised what kind of fandoms there are and what kind of people fondly remember things that you would assume should just be dead and forgotten over time. And you never know when stuff is going to just like reappear. But I often like the joke that one day we will all be dead and no one will remember Cat Dog. And this is probably unfair because, like, whenever you bring up Cat Dog, everybody knows Cat Dog, everybody remembers Cat Dog. But in my mind, like, Cat Dog is one of those shows that just hits, like, a level of mediocrity that, you know, like, you really can't hate it, you really can't love it, it doesn't stand out in any particular way, at least not in my head. And so I think, like, in 100 years, when everyone who saw Cat Dog is dead, no one will again ever talk about Cat Dog. Like, it doesn't do particularly anything that would cause you to think about it. And there are actually a lot of different cartoons that do this. This is based on kind of a discussion about copyright law, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I was talking to some girl, one of Claudia's friends, and I was a little bit surprised because I kind of joked out. I was like, yeah, I know I'm getting old because none of you guys know who Life with Louie is, or you don't know what Life with Louie is. And I was like, you know, and so in 100 years, I will be the last one to remember Life with Louie, and that'll be it. It'll die with me, Life with Louie. And then she went on to this, like, rant about copyright, and I was a little surprised, because normally I'm the one to rant about copyright, but good to see there are other people who are concerned that one day we're not going to have Cat Dog. But anyway, though, the idea is that because copyright law lasts for, like, 100 years, or I think even more, it's like the life of the creator plus a zillion years or whatever, something like that. Every time Mickey Mouse is due to expire, every time his copyright is due to expire, they increase the copyright length retroactively so that they can make sure that Mickey Mouse doesn't fall into the public domain. And in fact, we're due here in a couple more years for that to happen again. People are kind of saying, you know, we're not really sure if the courts are going to expand copyright again. Generally speaking, or rather the courts upheld it. Congress is generally very, very, very friendly towards the copyright industry, so a lot of times when they come forward and they say, hey, we need more powers, Congress is just like, you know, instantly obliging. They don't really care about the public domain or any of that stuff. Which is especially kind of counterintuitive with the way that media is going, and the idea that, like, everyone can self-publish now, and also the way that software becomes obsolete within a decade. It's kind of strange. Like, copyright law doesn't really agree with where we're going. But the practical stuff aside, I really think it's funny to look back on old cartoons that I used to watch and just think about, like, who's going to preserve them for 100 years. Like, these things will just be lost, and I don't know if it's a great big deal that these things will be lost, but Life with Louie is a good example. When I was a kid, I used to watch this show called Life with Louie. It was on Fox Kids. I believe it was like one of their Saturday morning cartoon blocks, and it came on at a slot that was, I think, not competitive with Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon, which is why I used to watch it. But I would just be flipping channels, I'd be looking for something that would be on, and Life with Louie would come up. And what Life with Louie was, for those who have never heard of this, because apparently a lot of people a little bit younger than me have never heard of this, Life with Louie was a cartoon about the childhood of Louie Anderson, who at the time was a very successful and famous comedian. He was an Emmy Award winner. I believe that he's still alive. But for better clarification, like, if you're familiar with Doug, the story of a pudgy kid in a green vest who is sad and can't date Patty Mayonnaise. That was kind of what Life with Louie was about. It was about Louie Anderson telling you about his childhood, and it turns out that he was kind of he was a fat kid, and his life was sometimes somewhat depressing. And I don't really remember a whole lot from Life with Louie. Like, I watched it frequently enough, but I feel like the only thing that I really vividly remember was, like, little Louie Anderson in a Speedo at the pool. And, like, that was just something that I always thought was really funny, that the animators were just like, yep, I think that was in the title sequence, which is why it was there. But it was something the animators were like, yeah, this pretty much, like, this is defining of the entire series. Louie Anderson in a Speedo in a pool. Yeah, this is about where we need to be. So yes, like, there's one episode that I recall from that, a single episode from Life with Louie that I remember, and I think it was, like, the finale of the series, and it might have been where it ended, but Louie is like, he goes up to a ski trip or something like that, and he's trying to impress this girl who's been in the series for the whole time, because Louie has had this, there's this girl, and he really likes this girl. And I can't remember who voiced the girl, but I think it might have been someone else who was kind of famous. And anyway, though, he decides he's finally going to confess that he likes her or something like that. And I think it's because like there was some other boy, like maybe Louie's friend or something like that, also liked her. Because I mean that just happens when you're like little and you have that girl in the group, and you start to get older and you start to notice the opposite gender. Well, like your friend becomes your girlfriend. So yes, Louie's friend was going to be like, oh, I like you. And so Louie, I don't recall what happened, whether or not Louie got the girl. I mean, I want to say no, because it was based off of Louie's life, and you know, the situation with that usually is the girl will go with whoever's superficially the cutest. I mean, when they're young like that, they really don't, like, look at, you know, the kids don't really look at each other and say, like, oh, yes, no, like, this guy's probably more financially stable, and he's a lot funnier. You know, like, they kind of look at it, and they're like, he has a cute butt, and that's kind of, like, as far as it goes. So she probably, I feel like he didn't win, but he lost a ski. And then he goes down, like, this ramp on a single ski, and he does, like, this jump. Or I think someone tells him he doesn't have to, or something happens. Whatever the case, it was, like, weird, and it was all, like, slightly heavier than the rest of life with Louie. And that's why it stands out in my head, because it was, like, that one episode that, like, they finally got some closure on, like, Louie liking this girl, and then they did some, like, weird ski thing, so it just, like, it sticks out in my head. But yes, another cartoon that came on in that same block was this thing called Bobby's World. And Bobby's World, I don't remember hardly at all, except for that it was voiced by this guy who was like speaking in falsetto. And if you look up pictures of Bobby's World, it's like very, very 80s looking, very strange. Like, I used to find Bobby's World very, very boring, very dull. But he had like this brother, this like older brother who kind of picked on him. And for whatever reason, like Bobby's shirt didn't fit. So, like, Bobby had, like, he has, like, these great big hands, like, the size of, I don't know, like, his head, and he's, like, I don't know, two heads tall. It's super weird, like, giant shoes, and then, like, his shirt just doesn't cover his whole body. Like, you can see his belly button, like, all the time, around the clock. And the only thing I really remember from Bobby's World was, there was a scene that they did where, like, they tell Bobby to wash his feet or he'll get athlete's foot. And then he's like, oh, athlete's foot. And he has this daydream about, like, his feet growing wings, and then he becomes a very fast runner. And he's like, well, athlete's foot doesn't sound so bad. I think I won't wash my feet. and that was kind of like Bobby's World in a nutshell. Is I believe that what they did is they would like do normal mundane things with Bobby, and then Bobby would have some kind of like outlandish imagination sequence about like, oh, what if this were not as straightforward as it actually is? And then you come back to reality and it's just perfectly straightforward, and that's kind of how it is. You know, I don't know, another very just like very boring, not really like not a whole lot going on kind of cartoon. And in 100 years, no one will know about Bobby's World. And I just have to think about how, like, these cartoons, like Life with Louie, I could understand because Louie Anderson was like an Emmy Award-winning comedian. He probably has a lot of fans and people who really like him. So I bet that there are, like, Louie Anderson fans who maintain all of his stuff. But, like, Bobby's World, I don't know about Bobby's World. Bobby's World, I think, has got to be one of those cartoons that, if it were to be lost to time forever, Bobby's World would be one of those things. And again, most of these things, due to the way that the internet works, I think most of these things are going to be preserved pretty much indefinitely. It's just that they'll be preserved illegally is the thing. Piracy will keep them going. As kind of a joke on that, I believe that Nintendo, it is speculated that Nintendo, when they started releasing their old Super Nintendo games on like the Wii U or the Switch or whatever it is, like, I don't know, I don't follow the politics all that closely, but I read that there was speculation that they actually didn't have the code, the old code, and so what they did is they found ROM hackers who had cracked their games, and then they grabbed the code from the ROM hackers. So piracy made it possible for Nintendo to keep their old games, if that is true. I don't know if it is or not, but, you know, you could imagine why a company might throw out their old Super Nintendo code. They'd be like, yeah, I mean, Super Nintendo's been a dead console for decades. Like, we're done with this, we're moving on, you know, we don't need to save this. So yes, piracy, one of the few things that will keep our stupid, mediocre, boring television shows and video games alive. Anyway, though, yeah, so Life with Louie. There were also other things that came on Fox Kids, things that are more liable to survive. The Tick animated series is a good example of that. I used to love The Tick, and a lot of people really love The Tick. And so when you talk about The Tick, it's one of those shows that, like, some people get really excited, and you're like, oh yeah, Dinosaur Neil, and people are like, Dinosaur Neil! Oh yeah! And they just, like, they remember all the fun stuff about The Tick. If you don't know The Tick was kind of great. Like, as a kid, I really loved it. But The Tick was sort of a spoof on the whole idea of superheroes. And honestly, you know, The Tick I feel like is due for a revival, the way that we've had all these, like, superhero movies and everything like that. Like, we need, like, a gritty reboot of The Tick to sort of make fun of all these gritty reboots of, like, Superman and Batman and everything else like that. Like, everything is gritty except for The Tick, you know? Or maybe maybe it's very gritty, but he's just a man in a bright blue suit. He's just running around, you know, spoon. But The Tick was this really goofy superhero who was, as they always put it, nigh invulnerable. And they never actually said, like, what he was vulnerable to. But his weakness was that he was just immensely stupid. So it was easy to outsmart him, and he usually, you know, only solved problems by just, like, fighting his way through whatever logically inconsistent path he thought was the most correct. And that was kind of the plot, is it was sort of like when the Tick gets here, he's like super strong. But he couldn't like fly, he didn't have eye lasers, he was just impossible to kill, and he was incredibly strong. So like, you knew he was going to just show up and like break everything. But if the enemy had a helicopter, there was a chance that they were totally going to get away. So, yeah, like, you never really knew if the Tick was going to succeed, and a lot of times it didn't really matter. And sometimes he would succeed, but not like, you know, they would like succeed in half measures, like, they would solve a problem, but it would still be kind of remain. Like, a great example of this was when one of his villains, Chairface Chippendale, decided he was going to carve his name in the moon. And so, like, the Tick stops him, but he only gets as far as, like, Cha. So it becomes Cha. Like, just Cha is carved in the moon from then on. And then later there's, like, this planet-eating Galacticus spoof who, like, takes a bite out of the moon. Like, the moon just takes a lot of abuse. So, yeah, so, like, the Tick, he doesn't save the day in the nick of time. He usually saves it, you know, just a little after the nick of time. And the whole thing was just all kind of a great joke. A lot of people remember the Tick. I don't feel like the Tick's going to be something that we lose to time, but it just, as I'm reminiscing about that old TV block, that was the thing that got me started on the Tick. When I got older, I went back and I read some of the comics. And there's a couple, like mini comic series, there's a couple of different continuities. There was, like, the first big Tick continuity, and then there was, like, the later ones that was kind of inspired to continue based on the TV, because the TV series, because a lot of people really like the TV series. There was also a live-action Tick show, if you can believe this, and it's not, like, awful, but it's also not very good. As an example, this isn't really a cartoon, but as an example of something that could potentially be lost to time if it weren't for the fact that people probably are hoarding and collecting Tick memorabilia as we speak. The Tick live-action series is one of those shows so mediocre that by the time that everyone who watched it is dead, there will be very few people who will remember it. Like, kids will inherit their grandfather's Tick collection and just be like, what is this live-action Tick film? But it has some funny moments. I mean, like, it's you know, what can I say? It's about a man in a blue Tick suit and his friend Arthur. It's you know, it's a great premise to start with. So even with, you know, not totally stellar, not a totally stellar job, it was still fun. It was still the Tick. Yes. But anyway, though, what's weird when you get to talk about these kind of things is I remember, like, for a while you might have thought that a lot of the old Hanna-Barbera cartoons might have died off, but then Cartoon Network kind of emerged when I was a kid. And Cartoon Network brought us a lot of different cartoons that were presumably dead. Like, it brought back Scooby-Doo. And I remember my mom actually complaining about this because she didn't really like Scooby-Doo very much when she was young. And, like, Scooby-Doo was on television when she was younger, or I don't know, I think like a teenager. I can't recall exactly. She was like, a lot of kids like Scooby-Doo, but I never did, and now it's, like, coming back, and it's getting popular again. And so I remember her complaining about Scooby-Doo. But, yeah, they brought back, like, Scooby-Doo, and, like, you know, the Godzilla, and, like, the Super Friends. You know, that awful, like, just travesty of animation and writing and everything else like that. Like, the Super Friends was, like, just memorably terrible. But the Super Friends is an example of something that it doesn't matter, really, that it was terrible, because that brand is so powerful. Like, Superman, X-Men, stuff like that, among those like very few, very precious, like elite intellectual properties that just seem like they'll never stop going. I mean, like people will keep making Superman films on for like 1,000 years or something like that. It's like, man, they may as well be like. I feel like back in the day, Hercules must have been that for the Greeks. Like every Greek probably had heard the Hercules stories a million times, and there were people still making new Hercules stories. Because I remember, like, when we were learning about Greek mythology, like, I decided I was going to, like, read all the Greek mythology. But then the more I looked into it, I found out that there were just tons and tons of stories, and not all of them followed continuity. Because, you know, different authors would write different stories, and so you'd find that, like, oh, here's a thing, like, it's like reading a bunch of fan fictions. You know, you find out, like, somebody's like, oh, here's, like, the story of Cerberus. And Cerberus was actually, like, a fully conscious, like, sapient animal. He could have he could hold conversations with you and stuff like that. And that kind of, like, flies in the face a little bit of what happened when Hercules ran into him. Like, he didn't have a conversation with the dog. So, you know, there's all these different things, like this person is born from this person can do this, and that person can do that, but in other stories you really don't see those elements. You know, nobody else agrees. That there kind of has to be a sort of, like, consensus that, like, yes, this is canon, like Cerberus can actually speak to people. But there is at least one Greek story where Cerberus has, like, intelligent conversations with people. Like, he sits down and he's like, yes, hello, my name is Cerberus. And everyone's like, oh, hi, Cerberus. He's like, yes, I am the guard dog of Hades. So yeah, the Greek, those Greek heroes are the things that I think are closest probably to what, like, Superman and the other DC heroes and Marvel heroes are all kind of like, is they're just this idea of, like, the ideal human, and their various stories and exploits, and eventually they get boring, and so people kind of invent new things to do, and they just say, like, oh yeah, you remember Cerberus? Like, well, Cerberus can actually speak, and they just throw them into new and outlandish kind of situations. Captain America is actually with Hydra. You know, Thor is actually a lady. Just like they just do whatever, like, outlandish thing because they're bored with the old stories and they want new ones. And in 1,000 years, people will look back and they'll say, like, yes, the American people had a very rich oral history and told a lot of stories, a very rich written history. They told a lot of stories about their hero, Superman. And they'll try to, like, piece a cohesive story from, like, start to end over his entire, like, copyright lifespan or whatever. Or possibly even further if it keeps going. I mean, or they won't. I mean, they won't. Theoretically, if Disney gets their way, then everything will become copywritten forever. And it will be illegal probably to do research like that, or it'll be illegal to store that kind of information. But in any case though, yeah, those things are super weird. But there were a lot of Hanna-Barbera cartoons though that were not very good and should have rightfully died. But they came back. And you don't really see them anymore. There's one that I can't even remember what it was, but it was about, like, this barbarian tribe that had, like, Glorp and Gleep. Like, people, you would have to have seen this to know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure if I can describe it to you. But there was, like, this barbarian guy, and he had, like, a sword, and it was, like, the sun sword, and he would just, like, flip it on, and it was basically, like, a lightsaber, is what he did. And I can't remember what all the deal was, but I remember, like, at one point one of his villains was like, I'll make my own sun sword. And so he, like, put, like, a car battery on, like, a rapier, and, like, he just, like, ran a charge through it. And it was like, see? It's the same as the sun sword. And he could fight the sun sword with it. And I don't know what logic they used for it, but I think that was the advantage of the sun sword, was that because it was just made out of pure energy, like, nobody could block it with their own sword. So, like, this barbarian guy would just show up and they'd be like, oh god, oh here it comes. Oh, it goes right through the armor, just melts right through it. So, like, when one guy figured out how to make his own sun sword, or at least a weapon that could sword fight with the sun sword, it was a really big deal. It was like, innovation, like, I did it. But they rode around on this big, like, rhinoceros with, I don't know, he could shoot, like, pellets out of his horn. And then there's these blobs called, like, Glorp and Gleep or something like that, and they could take various shapes. There was, like, one that was slightly larger than the other. And I think they had, like, a pet pterodactyl, and there was, like, a woman, and I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, then there's, like, the old George of the Jungle cartoons and things like that. And that, again, that got brought back because of Cartoon Network. George of the Jungle was probably on its way to death. It was probably on its way to being pretty much forgotten. But then Cartoon Network bought it, and they brought it back, and it did so well that they actually wound up making a live-action film about George of the Jungle. And then I think George of the Jungle has died again, and maybe this time he's gone for good. He'll never ever come back. His copyright will expire or be extended forever, and no one will ever talk about him again. You know, George of the Jungle. I don't know when he'd be due to turn up to expire. You also got that stuff with like Snidely Whiplash, and he's a little bit better known. Like, people all kind of know the Snidely laugh and the dog and things like that. He's sort of a famous villain. But that was another one of those Hanna-Barbera things. A slightly more high-effort Hanna-Barbera kind of thing. But another good cartoon, though, an example of one that we're going to lose forever, and no one will know what it was Mike, Lou, and Og. As I remember, Mike, Lou, and Og used to come on, and Mike, Lou, and Og, it came out during the cartoon block. Like, that was back when cartoons were just like, man, they were on fire. Like, everything Cartoon Network was releasing was just, like, amazing. Cow and Chicken, Powerpuff Girls, Johnny Bravo. Like, they were just doing great. They were all fun. They were all kind of like their own. They had their own feel. They're very strong. Dexter's Lab was great. And then Mike, Lou, and Og came out. And I remember everything about Mike, Lou, and Og was just incredibly subdued and incredibly boring. Like it was kind of great. It was like that was the theme. Their theme song was Mike, Lou, and Og, Mike, Lou, and Og, on the island where nobody goes, Mike, Lou, and Og. And there was really no better summation of what Mike, Lou, and Og was about than basically that theme song. It was just, yeah, here we are on this island where nobody goes. And every episode was about them not having anything to do, so they would ask Og to build them a device, so they would have conflict for a little while. And like half the episode would be about Og building the device, and the other half of the episode would be about them destroying the device because it caused a problem, or something like that. Like, Mike would be like, yeah, washing machines. Those are great. And then Og would be like, today I will build a washing machine. And he would build a washing machine, and then it would wash too many clothes, and they would have to destroy it because it was just, just didn't belong in this island culture. Mike, Lou, and Og. And it was always, like, I just remember they kind of had these, like, there were lots of, like, pauses in Mike, Lou, and Og. It always felt like they were kind of, like, stretching for time. And not in, like, a really bad way, but in kind of, like, a, like, everyone was on vacation sort of way. It was just sort of like, hey, Mike. Hey, Og. What do you want to do today, Mike? Well, Og, I was thinking about washing machines. And just the show. So, yeah, I mean, Mike, Lou, and Og was more recent, but that one's funny because it was so dull that many people don't even remember it. Like, I'll bring up Mike, Lou, and Og, and people will be like, what? What one's that? And somebody was posting, like, old cartoon spots, and they were like, yeah, check out Cartoon. And, like, Mike, Lou, and Og was being advertised. Like, they were trying. I mean, they were like, come on, Mike, Lou, and Og, become interesting, please. And Mike, Lou, and Og was just like, nah. I'm good. I'm fine. I'm doing okay. So that one didn't go over so well. Kids Next Door came along not too long after that. I think Kids Next Door was like the tail end of the cartoon block. But yeah, I know, Mike, Lou, and Og. Then there was also another show called Molly O, which I remember that came out. And Molly O is one that I feel like it deserves to die and be forgotten forever, and probably will be. But Molly O was this really it was like kind of like a cash grab show. It was one of those things where you could see that it was designed by a committee, because they sat down and they were like, well, what will kids like? Kids like they're sitting in a boardroom. They're like, well, kids like shows about themselves. They like kids. They like other kids. They want to see other kids, and they like music. Let's make a show about a kid who does pop music. And so they made this show about this little girl named Molly O who has a pop band. And the only thing, there's like one episode that I remember from this. The art style was kind of unattractive. I mean, like it was vaguely reminiscent of Klasky Csupo, and I don't know if it was them. Klasky Csupo, they're the people who did Rugrats, things like that. Klasky Csupo, man, their art style was weird. If not for Rugrats and All Real Monsters, I feel like they maybe never would have been able to break in. Because they had just sort of like a horrific way of drawing people. Like, everyone always looked like, oh my god, what are you, a human? No, humans don't look like this. Your head is all misshapen and terrible. And, yeah, but anyway, this might have been Klasky, I don't think it was Klasky Csupo, but it kind of had that sort of like big head, stick neck, just weird kind of proportions. Like they just look like it. Like they had like, I think their like feet were like trunks. I don't know. But Malio, like I remember one episode from Malio. I watched a couple episodes of it, and I remember one episode of Malio, and it was the one where like this like really soft-spoken guy with like dreads and this really deep voice. He starts his own band, and it's just like insanely more successful than Malio's band. And I remember watching the show and thinking to myself, like, yeah, that sounds about right. Like, basically, anyone getting away from Malio is like shackling yourself to Malio is just a death sentence. Like, she's a pop sensation. She's gonna be dead, next year. But be in your own band, be in your own creative person. The creative minds making this music, branching off and doing their own thing. Best thing that they could do, possibly. And so he's like super successful as soon as he gets away from Malio, but then he gives it all up to go back to her because he misses Molly. And it was kind of like portrayed as a sort of like familial relationship, because that's kind of like he's just this soft-spoken guy. He's like a family friend or something like that, and he plays, I think he played bass. I think that's what he did. And that's why he had the deep voice in the first place and why he was so quiet. He stands in the back and he plays bass, and he's happy doing that. So yeah, the end of the episode was like, yeah, I was actually just happy standing in the back and playing bass and looking after you kids. So he comes back, and that's the episode of Malio that I remember, the one where a guy found that he was much more successful independently, and then he shackled himself to Molly again because, he just didn't care, I guess. And I was, like, I couldn't even be angry at that. I was just like, I don't know, it was just like, Malio. I think her little brother was supposed to be like her agent, and he was some little rat-type character, but I don't know, Malio. Another thing in a similar vein to that was My Father the Rockstar, and I actually remember that one better as Mi Padre el Rockero, because I was once able to find like a Spanish channel, and they for whatever reason, they had like My Father the Rockstar on all the time. My Father the Rockstar was put together by like Gene Simmons. And I think it was his attempt to prove that, hey, Gene Simmons is just a regular guy, just like you. He doesn't do anything crazy or weird. And it was a really, really awful cartoon idea, because the story of, hey, my dad is totally normal and doesn't do anything weird, is like a really crappy cartoon. That's like, hey kids, like, let's have dinner as a normal family. And the conflict tended to be that, like, the kid, like, Gene Simmons' son, had all these expectations from his peers about, like, his dad, because his dad was Gene Simmons. And it wasn't really that it was Gene Simmons, but you could tell it was like Gene Simmons was writing about himself. And so it was like, like his son was, his friends, the friends of his son were like, hey, like, your dad's real cool. Do you want, like, get your dad to come down here? And the kid would be like, no, I don't like how popular my dad is. I want everyone to like me for me. And then, like, Gene Simmons would be like, that's good, son. You should be liked for you. You need to find your own thing. Like, I'm not always the best dad. Sometimes I'm really busy. It's a rough and tumble lifestyle. I have a really long tongue, and I wear a lot of makeup, and it was kind of my thing, and it's still pretty rad to have. Like, even today, I feel like it's still pretty rad. And you know what? The Dark Eldar in 40K never should have gotten away from my image, because it's just pretty dang rad. Like, I don't care. It's timeless. I don't care. And I don't know. Like I say, like, the main character, Gene Simmons' son, was just incredibly bland. Like, he was this little, like, nerdy kid with, like, glasses, and he's just like, I don't like rock and roll. Like, mostly just because I don't like the fact that my dad is always tied up in rock and roll. And it's kind of like, man, be your own character. I don't know. Like, this is a cartoon show. If you can't, like, if the show had been about this kid constantly trying to break out and, like, be his own person, maybe they would have had something. But when it's kind of like, I am the blandest human being, and I would appreciate you not to compare me to my father. Like, that's kind of, like, it's weird. It's hard to root for that hero. Like, yeah, man, you be totally bland. Like, you be nobody. Go forth and blend in with the crowd. Yeah, My Father the Rockstar. I don't know what'll go on with that one. That one's another one that would probably survive anyway, just because it has Gene Simmons on it, and there are lots of people who are fans of Gene Simmons. They'll hang on to that one, even if Gene Simmons himself has regrets and wishes that he hadn't released that. I don't know how he feels about that one, but just a really weird, a very funny concept, I think, and I can't imagine what happened. I mean, I can imagine, but I'm not sure how that must have gone. Like, Gene Simmons, I don't know. Did Gene Simmons come to them and be like, guys, I have a show idea I want to do. I want to write about me being normal, and everyone thinks I'm not normal, but they're wrong. And they were just like, brilliant, yeah, Gene Simmons is normal, the show, of course, yes, that's what the public wants. So, yeah, My Father the Rock Star. Another one I don't remember too well. I saw a couple of episodes. I think it only ran for like a season or two. I don't know. And then like Nickelodeon has had a bunch of things that they've done that have kind of like gotten started and then sort of vanished. Kappa Mikey was a good example. Some people remember Kappa Mikey fondly. I remember watching it and not really being too blown away. They had another thing like Yin Yang Yo, which I believe was vivid, if nothing else. I think a lot of people probably... I don't know how popular that one is. This is like we start to get into things where like I started to get too old, and cartoons that seem obscure to me may be better known to other people. I feel like more people knew Yin Yang Yo, but it was only available on like that special Nickelodeon channel for the longest time, and I think it was doing well there. I believe they also ran Puka, and I think Puka ran for longer. I don't know, Puka was like this, it was about this little girl, she liked Garu. Actually, that might have been Disney XD that ran that. I know, Disney did a couple of things. Disney kind of had their moment. They came back and they shined with a couple of different things. Juniper Lee and stuff like that came off for a while. I don't know, it's kind of weird. Like, Nickelodeon started off on top, and then kind of Cartoon Network took over, and then like Disney sort of had some revival, and they did really well with Gravity Falls. Star Versus is doing great. Disney has shown some promise. Cartoon Network is kind of... They've got Steven Universe, but I understand Steven Universe isn't doing so well. A lot of people think they're trying to sabotage him. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, though, the point of this is there's a lot of really bad cartoons that I remember with a certain fondness because of how mediocre they were. I mean, like, looking back as an adult and as being someone who kind of works with this stuff, and like you think about all the work that would have gone into it and all the man hours and just the sweat and the tears and the dreams, and you kind of think about like, man, like, it was a process to make Mike, Lou, and Og. Like, people really sat down and they were doing their best to make Mike, Lou, and Og, and you know, you can't diminish the amount of work that goes into that sort of thing, but just like, you know, I feel like people, when you make a thing, like, everyone's artistic visions, they have kind of a voice. Like, when I write, people sometimes know it's me. Like, even if I'm writing anonymously, people can sometimes recognize me because of the way that I write. Like, I have a voice when I write, and artists get the same way. When they draw, they have a voice. And so, like, you look at like Mike, Lou, and Og, and in a way, like, it wasn't a very fun cartoon, but I feel like I can appreciate, you know, like, whoever was running that, you could feel their voice in it, and their voice was just very soft-spoken, very polite. Like, they must have been a really chill person, you know, to write Mike, Lou, and Og. And again, not the best for television, but just, you know, like, yeah, Mike, Lou, and Og. Molly O would have been an example of just like, that was just the voice of some business suit, you know, just sitting around. Like, he didn't really exactly have his own voice, so he was trying to like borrow somebody else's voice. And this is the weirdest thing. When like something is corporate written, when you can tell that like executives are coming in and they're just like, do this, and do that, because it's like, you know, it shows it's big on the charts. It feels, you know, like, people dislike that. And I feel like the reason it doesn't work is because those corporate executives, they don't have a voice. They don't have an artistic voice. Because it's not something that you just, like, you don't just have a voice. You can't just copy someone else's voice. You learn it. Like, through practice, you know, your hands begin to remember the way that you draw. You know, your mind remembers the way that you speak. You write in a way that's kind of characteristically you. And those executives, you know, they're not artists, they're not writers, they don't develop that way. And so when they come in, they're like, just do this. It doesn't have that, it doesn't have like a characteristic, it doesn't sound like a person. You know, it sounds like a mandate. And so, you know, stuff like that, like those corporate created cartoons, those boardroom created cartoons, they always fail because there's no, you know, identity to those things, and they'll never develop an identity. You know, no one will look at them and recognize them and say, yes, this is Molly O. They'll always just say, like, this was a boardroom idea. So, I don't know. But some of those, yeah, some of those cartoons, just weird. Probably going to be forgotten. By the time I'm dead, no one's going to know any more about them. Bobby's World, long forgotten. My Father the Rock Star. only remembered fondly by Gene Simmons fans. And then, you know, that'll be it. Just kind of strange. And I imagine someone somewhere with some kind of archive trying desperately to remember why that they saved all these episodes of Life with Louie or Cat Dog. And they'll just be like, someday maybe man will require Cat Dog. Maybe they'll need Life with Louie. I don't know. But actually, stuff like that is how we lose those kinds of things. You find that like really old archives often get destroyed or lost because nobody bothers checking on them or updating them. Because seriously, how often do you need copies of Cat Dog? Like basically never. And it's actually kind of a shame because I was thinking about it. And like again, Cat Dog is one that everybody knows. It's a very poor example for this like it will die and no one will remember thing because it was kind of weird, and a lot of people did really like Cat Dog. But I feel like imagine if Cat Dog were already in the public domain, like right now. And it wouldn't be, even if you went by the 25 years domain thing, we would still have a while. But like, suppose that someone just gave me carte blanche to do something there, so just bring back Cat Dog. Like, Greg, just bring back Cat Dog. I would write about the Greasers, maybe. Like, I would just, like, write about whatever the Greasers were doing. You'd have, like, potential there. There's, like, weird elements and things like that in that show that you could grab on and you could do something with and you could kind of flesh it out. And if you didn't have to like sell it as like Cat Dog presents the Greasers, if you were just like, yeah, Greaser Dogs, and you made it its own standalone show using those characters, you could go somewhere with it, and people would maybe not even know that it came from the Cat Dog universe. It would just be kind of its own thing. Or you could write about that little bird, the little and unbelievable her I can't remember, Wanda, I think it was. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it'll never happen though. It'll never happen. It's gonna stay under lock and key for the next 100 years, and then that'll be it. We'll see if archivists save it, or if maybe piracy will get shut down over the coming decades. They'll get it under control, and that'll be the end. That'll be the end of those shows. We'll never see them again. Yeah, hard to say. But anyway, though, I suppose that'll be it for today. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.